Funding for this program is provided in part by the Minnesota Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund and the citizens of Minnesota.
I'm Larry Tillemans from Minnesota. I had experience at the clerk-typist at Nuremberg and Dachau war crime trials. Eisenhower toured one of the camps and he told American soldiers, get all the evidence that you can, because somewhere down the line, some SOB is going to say it never happened.
The Holocaust has the dubious distinction of being the most documented, the best documented genocide in the world.
Why do you hate the Jews? What did they do wrong?
Larry Tillemans was one of the Americans who made the original Nuremberg trial into the resounding success that it was.
When you're seeing things so obviously sinful and wrong, and you're an impressionable young man, it's going to affect you.
And because he was typing all these transcripts, he was probably getting a much heavier dose of horror than most of the people who worked at Nuremberg.
What would life be like in America if we had lost?
Oh, this is as real as they come. I mean, Larry wears his heart on his sleeve.
I want to go to work.
He's the sweetest, most genuine person I think you'd ever be fortunate enough to meet.
Are you ready? Get set, go!
His nature is very positive and very joking, lighthearted.
Yeah, we got some winners!
Our dad was just more fun and games.
How about a three-legged race with you?
We, to this day, do fun and games with Dad.
Go! Go!
He wears that shirt, you know, with kind of a dry grin, and he knows that everybody is kind of laughing at him, and that's exactly what he wants. And so he likes to entertain people.
On your mark, get set, pull! Pull that is set. Pull him back up, pull him back up. Come on, girl!
There's not a better birthday present than to give my dad a microphone and, you know, let him entertain a group on his birthday. There's nothing that makes him happier than that.
Everyone that meets up here is the winner.
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Larry. Happy birthday to you.
Turn around, you'll be all right. Well, my mom passed away last year, and so one of the things that makes this special is that my mother would never have let my dad throw a party like this.
Set, go!
And so he's got an opportunity to, you know, throw a party, you know, flat out with no restrictions.
He was kind of like a Pied Piper when he'd come home he was a traveling salesman, so when he'd come home on the weekends, he would organize games for the whole neighborhood. All the kids would come and he would play with us all.
Every kid in the neighborhood came over to our house on the weekends and he entertained them. We played endless amounts of games. And then he'd be gone for the week. And so we were with Mom, and so Mom pretty much ruled the roost, and she had to. There were 6 of us.
I would say that my dad's life was definitely affected by the war, because he was in high school at the time, and there were friends that he knew from high school, or kids, a few years older than he was, that, were literally killed in the war. His two brothers, saw heavy combat in the war, and so it had quite a bit of impact on my dad. And to think that, that the Nazis might have continued to overpower the world, is not a welcoming thought.
He's a small town boy. He was 18 and sent to Dachau, right? He wasn't the first wave in that liberated the camp. He was the second wave in, so he saw those atrocities. And he actually was at the Nuremberg Trials, and he took testimony of the victims of the concentration camps. And you can only imagine the shock of a young kid getting plunked into something like that.
I think at the time there was a lot of young men over there that didn't know much else to do with it but to be at the cantinas and talk and drink. And at the time, most of those men were basically shell-shocked. So I think the era of the time was you don't talk about it. You just man up, so to speak. And that's how you have to take it.
I'm Larry Tillemans from Minnesota. I'm an old soldier. I had experience at the clerk-typist at Nuremberg and Dachau war crime trials. And I'd like to tell a bit about it.
In the Palace of Justice in Nuremberg, the people of the world came together, for there sat the International Military Tribunal to judge the chief Nazi war criminals.
As a soldier there in 3rd Army, they needed clerk-typists, and I was qualified as a clerk-typist, so I had the opportunity of doing work or typing from affidavits that were used at the trials.
Prisoners of war attempting to escape are to be fired on without previous challenge. No warning shot must be fired.
I'll never forget the first time that I came into that courthouse or the palace and saw the seated 24 of the Nazi so-called criminals were seated there. I remember looking at Goering and wondering, my God, that's the second in command to Hitler. And here I was just a kid in the army, just 18 years old, and I was looking second in command of the Nazis.
More proof of this savage Nazi policy comes from the affidavit of Kurt Lindau, former Gestapo officer.
They existed in the prisoner of war camps.
When he heard of the horrors after he landed in Germany and what they were going to be doing, and he would read the ticker tape or see this constant commotion coming out of the trials and then take these depositions and type them up, he remembers sitting up at night and just crying in his bunk because it was just so terrible news for anybody to listen to. And I think being exposed from a small Minnetonka town, it was just overwhelming.
Their rise to power was...
I did cry. I cried at nights thinking about what those guys had done to those innocent people and all the pictures they'd flash on the screen.
Culminating finally in terror and flame.
You got a picture here that shows thousands of people, and these thousands of people were there in the camps, and they thought they were going to get a shower. There was a big door where they could go through, about 2,500 at a time, would go to the showers. And they had machine guns around these people that were holding them in this group. And when they went into that building for a shower, what do you think they got? They got gas.
It took from 3 to 15 minutes to kill the people in the death chamber, depending upon climatic conditions. We knew when the people were dead because their screaming stopped.
I couldn't forgive them in my heart or in my soul, what the things that they had done. The terrible things that they had committed, those things against those innocent people, men, women, children. 10 million of them suffered and died in those camps. And a lot of these guys were given the orders, what they had to do. And they showed no mercy, and they sat there and said they were just taking orders.
We usually waited about 1/2 hour before we opened the doors and removed the bodies. After the bodies were removed, our special commandos took off the rings and extracted the gold from the teeth of the corpses.
Much of this loot was then transferred to secret vaults of the Reichsbank in Frankfurt am Main.
When you're seeing things so obviously sinful and wrong, and you're an impressionable young man, it's going to affect you. The murderers, you killed all those people. You must have some sorrow in your heart or soul or what you've done, don't you? Why did you do it? It took me a long time to get over that hate that I had in my heart and in my soul and my mind. And you can't hate and be a Christian, so somewhere along the line I found that my soul had to have forgiveness for them, and I did. We had typing in school, and my mother said, "Now, Lawrence," I was a sophomore at the time, "be sure you take up typing. You have an alternative to take up typing." "Typing, Mom? I'm not a girl. Boys don't take up typing." "Well, yes, your brothers did. Both Bernard and your 3 brothers have all taken up typing, and so has your sister, Sister Rose. And she learned to type. So everybody in our family is going to learn to type.
Those are errors which you should not have made, and if made, should be erased neatly. Neither should your periods and other punctuation marks cut through the paper like this.
Well, I let it go at that. And then that fall, checked into the school, and in the typing class, there was 20 girls and 1 boy. And who do you think that 1 boy was? That was me. I rather enjoyed it. I mean, after all, you're the only boy in a class of 20. I graduated in 1944, and that's about 75% of the boys, that 15 out of 20 boys. And I inquired about that, and that was average for the war years, where about 75% of the boys in the graduating classes entered into military service. My brother Bernard said, "Don't get in the infantry." He knew everybody was going in the Army, and he'd been there, and he called me. He said, "Don't get in the infantry. See what you can do about getting in the Signal Corps." Well, I said, "I know how to type." Well, that would be one thing you can put down on your MOS, is that you're a clerk-typist. And then I added a little to that. When I did it, I put down expert typewriter, 42 words a minute. I don't think I lied about it. I told them how fast I could type, and that wasn't too fast, but it was fast enough to go into the Signal Corps anyway. I wasn't the best typist, but the Army didn't want any errors. And we had onion skin paper, so that meant you had, if you made a mistake and you had 5 copies in there, then you had to stop and peel that one back, erase it, erase the next copy, next copy. So I was pretty slow, and they saw that pretty fast, so they mostly gave me paper shuffling than I did more than typing, but I would type every day a certain amount, yeah. Eisenhower toured one of the camps, and he told the soldiers then, American soldiers, get all the evidence that you can. Get the testimonials. Type out all the data about what happened here. because somewhere down the line, some SOB is going to say it never happened. And that was a quote from Ike. And so that's what I'm doing.
My dad just never had a negative thing to talk about. So, you know, everything was in a positive light and a very positive attitude, and I don't know that I've ever had a conversation with my dad about anything negative. So it was not like him to talk about his drinking problem.
Yeah, it was a carryover. I did too much drinking in the Army.
Probably the time when he was coming to grips with it, when I found out that he was in jail for his third DWI, and that was when my son was born. So obviously there had been other DWIs, and I wasn't aware of those. It was up in the hospital when my mom had come to the hospital and Dad wasn't there because of the DWI. So.
Well, I had that 5-state region. That was gone from Monday till Friday, you know. And my wife raised the kids, and there's 6 of them, and that was 6,000 nights out in motels over that period of time. 6,000 nights in a motel, and then I got to drinking.
I'm not so sold that that's necessarily, you know, why he drank or anything, because I think the disease is what it is. But I think he started to drink more, and when he no longer had a purpose after he was retired, and so that drinking I actually think is a blessing that he got picked up and he was in jail and had to sit there and be accountable for his behavior and change his lifestyle. And the whole AA program led him back to God.
By that time that I got straightened around, I was alcoholic, of course, and it was through the power of prayer. Power of prayer changed the whole thing around. When I realized the damage and hurt that I'd caused the family and everything else with my drinking, then I realized I better get down on my knees and stop that right now. And then just like that it happened, because I was praying, and I prayed that I could overcome that drinking, and I did. I told my wife the next day I'm not going to drink anymore. Well, she'd heard that, but then I had to prove it too, and then I did.
So for Dad to have gone through the steps of alcoholism and the recovery, part of those is to go and help other people.
And I feel that God was giving me advice. Tell other people about it. You're sober now, you quit drinking. That's part of it. And the other part of it is to tell about the Holocaust. I had to feel it was part of my duty to tell people just what happened. Because we have people today that just don't want to even talk about it. We have people today that deny it even happened. Countries deny it happened. And I'm on a campaign right now to tell them just what I heard and what I saw. And those are the facts.
Get your game on, Dad.
I'm 85 years old. Traveling is tiring, but if you got something that you can help other people with, I feel it every morning when I get up. What can I do to help somebody?
So we're loaded.
This is a beautiful view right here with all of these. I started for the most part about 24 years ago putting on sessions to people, and there were, whether they'd be a school or church or jails, prisons, I talked to them all. I did over 400 presentations and many hours at it, and I haven't had anybody get up and walk out.
My dad loves to talk in front of crowds. He's a wonderful promoter, and I think he just decided, plus in addition being recently retired and having some time on his hands, this was how he took up a calling.
All right, thank you very much. I was asked, well, what is the Holocaust? How can you explain what the Holocaust is? I think this is the simplest explanation you can give, and it's in that handouts I got there. Imagine yourself in a land where your countrymen follow the voice of a political extremist who did not like your religion. Imagine having everything. Nazism taught hate, and 10,770,000 people died. Think of that if you would. Some 1,000 Army personnel were assigned duty at Nuremberg. You can imagine how many guards it took to have 20,000, 40,000, 60,000 in one of these camps. See the bodies piled up in front of the crematorium at Dachau. Here's a Nazi officer standing amongst bodies. And this is what you saw, and you'll never forget it. I'm talking here for half an hour, and you can't begin to say the enormity of what those trials were. 200,000 affidavits, and you got people saying it's a myth, it never did happen. What would life be like in America if we had lost? Just think of that. And with that, I think that I'll close. And thank you very much for having me.
You gonna take it easy next week, or?
Yeah, I am.
Thank you for sharing your stories.
All right, thank you. Thank you very much.
Wonderful, wonderful. Very interesting. Very
Thank God you like it.
Take a picture for us? Just push that middle button right there.
I support him, whatever direction he's leaning. I try to just be helpful. And taking my dad around to these presentations has been a lot of fun. And it's been rewarding in that I get to know my dad, whereas I haven't felt like through my whole life have I known my dad. So as we've chatted before, he would say things to an audience of 400 that I had never heard before. So he's a very public man, but privately, one-on-one, there wasn't those discussions.
There we got it. Oh, I had a goal to start with, and I don't know as I knew what it was, but I had a goal to tell the story. And once it started, it wasn't hard to get others to send my letters out, and I got accepted to talk here and talk there. So I don't know how many different places that I've talked with, but I know that I've given over 400 presentations. You're Nancy?
I'm Nancy. Nice to meet you.
Well,
You got some cold answers.
These soldiers came into the Dachau not knowing at all that there was concentration camps. We didn't know about concentration camps. The word hadn't gotten out. Now these two men were capos. What's a capo? A capo would be prisoner prison guard. The Nazis needed those guards for war, not for garden. So they would select certain numbers of prisoners that would come in to be a capo. And he'd be a prisoner prison guard. And they told him, now you do what you're told, we won't shoot you. If somebody harms you, we'll shoot 10 of them. But you do what you're told. April 29 of 45. See, the war was just about over then. And the 42nd and 45th Division get an introduction to Dachau. 39 railroad cattle cars with 2,310 bodies. Now, if you look to the end, that's where the crematorium was. Now, they'd run out of gas. They'd run out of fuel. They'd run out of wood, run out of coal. You didn't have any way to make fire. And that's really what ended the war. I asked Norbert, he was the interpreter, one of the interpreters. I'd like to see what they would say if we could just have a session with them after the court hearings today. So Norbert arranged to talk to him and find out what it felt like. I said, ask him this, Norb, what did it feel like to throw little kids, men, women, children, into those ovens? Well, they talked in German and told him, and he told us what they said. And he said, well, We did this for 2 years, every day, 14 hours a day, throwing people into the incinerator. But we had all the cognac we wanted to drink, and we were drunk every day for 2 years. Can you imagine, though we had all this testimony, 200,000 affidavits, that's on record, 360 were live witnesses, that they still have countries that say it never happened. And then we have some schools now are no longer teaching it. And if we don't teach it in the schools, where is our youth going to learn about the horrors of the Holocaust and what had happened to those people? So thank God that we have got some schools yet, and you've got them right here, that are teaching about it. But you'd be amazed how many of them have dropped it, and I don't know why.
Okay.
All right. Thank you, Nancy.
Thank you, Larry.
All
Are
right.
you ready to?
Yeah. Get in step.
I think you had about 150 people there.
Were there that many?
Yeah, I counted.
It is a lot of fun. I mean, I've been in the audience a lot of times, and so I can repeat everything he's going to say, and I know how the jokes are going to go, and I know how the audience is going to react to them. But every time, it's just, it's very rewarding.
Hi, I'm Larry.
I'm Tracy. Nice to meet you.
Glad to know you.
Hello, sir.
Hi, I'm Larry.
Welcome.
Yeah.
Welcome. Glad to have you here.
Talk to you guys today. Good honor and a privilege. Sometimes I forget what I'm supposed to be talking about.
I'll remind you.
Okay, good enough.
Good luck.
He starts a topic that allows other people to open up and start talking about things that a generation really kept closed.
The main reason that we don't want to stress Holocaust anymore is that offends many people that don't believe it even happened. Oh, isn't that a pity? We must never forget how precious freedom is. One man taught hate, and 6 million Jews died in the Holocaust. 50 million people died in World War II. You got to remember there was a couple 100,000 in these camps. In one period of time, from April of 42 to 45, 5,500 Jews were put to death per day. Supposing that Times or the St. Cloud Times paper would put the headlines down there, 5,500 Jews put to death today. The next day, 5,500 for 21 months total. That's what it averaged out. And you know, when we'd walk, where we would come in from our door, we'd have to walk through where these guys were. And if you looked at them, it looked like the same thing you went to the Businessmen's Association meeting right here in Alexandria. You can't point anything out. Gary got out there on that day I told you about. They all had an opportunity to defend themselves. He spent 3 days ranting and raving, and one day I watched there and he got off his chair and he come walking forward. Smell the dead that is under here. Smell the dead under the ground. That's you, America. Your Air Corps went out here and they just killed all those people, and there they lay underneath. You did this, America. And that's the way he carried on for 3 days. And then Jackson was the chief prosecuting attorney for the 4 countries. Every one of those points that Goering had put out, he had to show there was a lie, nothing but lies. All right, I'm winding down here now. I've got handouts that Jackie's got, I think, at that table back there. We'll have them, and there's over 40 or 50, and we'll hand them out as you leave, maybe. All right. Thank you very much.
He is just always happy. I've not really seen that he's not happy. You know, he pretty much takes life in stride. It's, you know, it just comes with the territory, is one of my dad's favorite sayings, you know. So if he can't remember, which is happening more frequently now, then it just comes with the territory. He had an eye operation in the beginning of November and didn't really take very well, so he's just got one really good eye. But it comes with the territory, you know. So it's, I say, Dad, you're getting smaller. Yeah, I'm getting smaller. And it's just, you know, it's just take it as it comes. I'm not going to remember, and I can't move as fast, but, you know, so I haven't seen, I think he'll be that way until he's not breathing anymore. He'll be a very, very positive man. He looks for the good in it all, and we joke about it, and it cracks me up.
Nice to see you, Jerry Bow. Yeah, nice to see you too. You bet. Thank you.
Hi, Gary.
How are you? Nice to see you. But thanks for a nice crowd. I really appreciate that you all came out. And we're going to get started here. And I want to introduce my friend, but I want to tell you a little story first.
Jerry was captain of the guards, and I was a clerk-typist. And we never knew one another at that time, but we just got acquainted after we started holding meetings about it.
He said, you know, Jerry, he said, it's 66 years since we see each other. Think of that, 66 years. I didn't think I was that old. But by golly, I am. And that, of course, is Nuremberg. Well, I was a regimental sergeant major, and I had to see that everybody was in order for the trials.
They had solved the check problem purely.
There was quite a few weeks, standing there and behind the criminals.
Until the last moment, until the 20th.
And I'm standing right on the very end, the 25th guy on the end. I'm right here, right there again, with my white helmet. And there is Herman Goring right there, and that's us back here. And Hess is sitting there, right next door to him, this gentleman right here. The only trouble I had was one time when Goring got his sentence. When Herman Goring got his sentence, he stood up and started mouthing off a little bit, and I told him to sit down and be quiet, and he did just that. And that was the last I heard of him. Oh, there's the executionist right there. And I have another thing at home that shows how he tied those 13 knots and so forth. The trials went on very, very nice. And I was glad when they were over, and I was glad when they started. That was a great thing for the country. What do I think of Larry? He's a terrific guy. Terrific guy. I met him 66 years later, and we've been back and forth together all the time. I'll probably call him tonight and talk to him and see how he's feeling and all this and that. So a lot of this stuff I show the kids at school and explain to them. And I try not to get tears in my eyes and in my voice and everything like that. But sometimes you do.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I'm so happy that all these people could come and hear you today. And let us give them a big applause. I think it was wonderful.
We have almost no eyewitnesses left. We have some, and one wishes them long and healthy days, but the tyranny of the biological clock guarantees the fact that there will be few eyewitnesses left, few people to speak in the first person singular. Anybody who can be an eyewitness, whether it's to what happened exactly, or an eyewitness as a survivor of the Holocaust, or even an eyewitness as in terms of our liberators or the people who were at Nuremberg, who can speak of having seen that, is a witness of tremendous value.
It's one thing to be righteous, but in your community there was something wrong, and you work to repair it, and you work to rebuild, and you work to ensure that it didn't happen, that is real righteousness.
The thing you have to understand about Holocaust denial is that at its heart, it is nothing but a form of anti-Semitism. It emanates from a deep-seated hatred of Jews and anger at any sympathy Jews might receive, and often, on top of that, for many deniers, is a love, affection, respect for Nazi Germany.
And in the Hebrew, God refers to Noah as a tzaddik b'doro. Deborah Lipstadt is truly that kind of tzaddik b'dorah. in her generation. It's one thing to teach the history of denial. It's something else to spend 5 years defending in a British court the obnoxious chicanery of a denial.
Many things are debated, and debated quite passionately by historians. What is not debated is that it happened. Because we have so many, as I said earlier, we have so many documents, we have so much information, we have more evidence on this genocide than virtually any other genocide that happened in the 20th century. And there are a lot of, there's evidence of the Armenian genocide and other genocides, but this one is so thoroughly documented that to claim it didn't happen is just ludicrous.
Good night, Larry. Wasn't it wonderful? Good.
I think that people who have either experienced this kind of horror, whether it's the Holocaust or whether it's Rwanda or whether it's the former Yugoslavia, who can go out and talk about it. And those who have witnessed it, those who maybe through no design, but just through the vagaries of chance and fate and being assigned to it, who can go out and talk about what they saw and talk about what happened, are doing an exceptional service to history. So I wish them long years for their own sake, but I also wish them long years and good health so they can continue doing the work that they're doing, because it's so important.
Boy, that's about perfect timing when it comes to 9:30. Oh, here we are. Here we're coming. Yeah.
Would you like to sit down?
Yeah, all right.
Larry's story is something that validates everything we already know.
Did you ever get access to the courtroom experience?
Yeah, I got in there.
What would it mean to be in the same room with people who were hardened and bureaucratic criminals, who were willing to create a machinery that would send millions to their death?
Goering took a pill the night of the hanging, or just before.
What does it mean to be a human being in the same room with that individual, and to listen to some testimonies, to examine those documents, and to internalize these stories? And then to, what does that do to a person?
We got to interview the hangman too.
And I know that there are people in this part of Minnesota who are not Jewish, never met a Jewish person before in their lives, can't conceive of what happened in the Holocaust, and yet through the window of Larry's life, he's of a religious faith that they can identify with. He grew up here in Minnesota, and so their access to the Holocaust is through his experience. It's not about just pushing information at someone. There's also an internal journey that everybody has to go through. And they ask the question, who I am, to what am I a witness, and then how should I respond? And everybody has to kind of go through that assessment of where they are in the world. Who gets the torch next? The only way we're going to be able to get at Holocaust history after the last eyewitness is gone is through technology, and also whatever paper documents we have. The question is how to humanize that story, how to give it emotional validity when you don't have the survivor sitting there across from you.
I'm scared of the day that interviews like this can't happen, when those voices aren't there anymore, when we don't have any witnesses anymore. That's why it's so important to do this recording process now.
Right. So one of the things that we wanted to do was to share with you, they wanted to share with you what they're doing in this class called Performance in Literature. It's a communication studies class.
Okay.
So I thought maybe
being involved in a
you could just
ongoing conversation with persons from another culture, from another faith, is something that takes a little bit more commitment, and it's a willingness to step over a line in terms of your comfort zone and what you know or what you think you know, and into the possibility that there may be more than one legitimate narrative about what it means to be human than the one that you grew up with?
Well, we perform Holocaust witness testimony. So we take material from the book Witnesses and also from The World Must Know. And students get a chance to choose what material strikes them the most and then perform it.
We could even, this interview could be turned into a performance.
Oh.
So we could definitely, we could perform you.
If you let us, of course. Was it hard?
Pardon?
Was it hard? Was it emotionally?
Well, yeah, it was.
Were you at the liberation of Dachau?
No.
Why do you think people deny the Holocaust?
Were there many survivors at the trial?
Did you actually ever see any of the concentration camps? Not all Germans were Nazis.
It took a lot of people to do nothing.
Hate.
If hate's the problem, can we teach love?
I know hate played a big part, and they didn't want to take a stand. They wouldn't do anything about it. And that's worse yet, when you know what's going on and you don't do anything about it.
If you don't want to study the Holocaust, you risk its recurrence, right? And we learn the lessons of the Holocaust because we want to prevent today's genocides. What's the next Holocaust, right? If you don't learn these lessons, they can recur. In fact, they have recurred in places like Rwanda, Cambodia, and the like. And as this generation passes away, both the survivors and I'll call them the liberators, people like Jerry and Larry who fought the Second World War and/or participated in the prosecution of Nazi war criminals, at some point you will have nobody with a living memory of it. And so it's important to record these recollections. It's important to honor the people who participated. But it's important to create this foundation of knowledge going forward so that we can learn the lessons, but also repudiate anyone who dares say that it never happened. We have our Yom HaShoah, our Day of Holocaust remembrance here at a synagogue. It's always in a synagogue. There's a strong theological overlay for the event itself, and it's supposed to be because it's supposed to be the presence of faith in God. On top of that, we have a speaker every year. This year it's Eli Rosenbaum, who's the longest serving prosecutor of Nazi war criminals in the world.
How you doing, guy?
Good to have you here.
Oh, it's so good. I feel
He also
safe
does
now.
a marvelous job of connecting with people who teach about the Holocaust. We try to do it, and of course he does it from a national level out of the Justice Department, and two people with whom he's connected are Larry Tillemans and Jerry Bow.
Mr. Bow?
Yeah, there's Jerry.
I'm Grace. Hi, how are you? What a privilege to meet you. Finally, thank you. Your dad is a force of nature, but you don't need me to tell you that. You are amazing. Have you been in a synagogue before?
No.
Oh, okay, for both of you, the first time. Okay.
I think there's a twofold thank you that needs to be made. One of which is, without the armed forces of the Allies, whether it's the Soviet Red Army, the British Army, the American Army, the Canadian Army, the Free French Army, and the like, the Holocaust would have continued until all the Jews of Europe were slaughtered, right? So you have to remember the role of the Allied armed forces, including our own, including Minnesotans, in defeating the Third Reich. Secondly, some of these very same soldiers, like Jerry and Larry, became a part of the apparatus that prosecuted the Nazi war criminals after the war.
Where do you want us to sit?
Larry was part of the prosecution team as a clerk stenographer preparing the thousands of affidavits necessary to prosecute the case.
And I thought it came out pretty well.
Secondly, there was Jerry with the important role of being a guard. But you know, that presence of the American soldiers in the courtroom spoke volumes. Being there, and he looked eye to eye with some of the worst criminals of history. And the fact that two generations later, both of them have dedicated themselves, neither of whom probably had any contact with Jews, to telling the story of the Holocaust, victims both Jewish and non-Jewish, alike is remarkable. And it gives us the chance at dinner and then a bit at the Yom HaShoah commemoration to thank them for what they've done.
The thing that so amazes me and impresses me constantly about these two wonderful men is that they could just be home enjoying their well-earned retirements. They are not the youngest people in the state of Minnesota, and it is undoubtedly a struggle to do what they do, but they are committed to ensuring that audiences all over the state, especially young audiences, children who don't know what they should know, learn about Nuremberg and especially about the crimes of the Nazi regime, including or especially the Holocaust.
Elizabeth Barrett, Lydia Fantlova, Paul Monkeef, Franka Watts, Moshe Ringler, Elsie Strauss, Aharon Berg, Jacob Kimmelman, Moishe Tobias, Franz Rosina, Maurice Riviere, Mixla Kuzenda.
Today we remember all those whose lives were lost or forever altered by the Shoah. And we are challenged to think about what might motivate us to respond to warning signs of genocide today. Our choices in response to hatred truly do matter, and together we can help fulfill the promise of never again. I'd now like to invite the 6 survivors up to light our pillar candles.
For those of us at the Department of Justice who continue to work to bring to justice the criminals who carried out Adolf Hitler's evil design, it's the experience of meeting the survivors that gives us the strength to press on despite the many frustrations of our work, the outrageous lies of the defendants, the delaying tactics of some of their lawyers, the insensitivity of some judges, and the depression that threatens to overcome us when we must ask survivor witnesses to reopen old psychic wounds in order to testify in our prosecutions, and when we see the survivor witnesses weep again for lost parents and lost brothers and sisters. These survivors of the Shoah are the heroes of our prosecution program. Our trials continue what one might call a law enforcement tradition that began nearly 68 years ago when the major surviving Nazi criminals were put on trial at Nuremberg, Germany. That legendary trial was the first ever international criminal trial, and its success was due primarily to the contributions of the American contingent of prosecutors, guards, and support staff. As Steve Hunnigs mentioned, we are very, very privileged to be joined here this evening by 2 of those Nuremberg pioneers, Larry Tillemans and Gerald Bowe, great Minnesotans sitting there in the front row. What an honor it is to be in the presence of 2 Army veterans of the greatest generation who now devote themselves tirelessly to teaching the lessons of Nuremberg and the history of Nazi crimes against humanity. They teach tolerance and understanding across the great state of Minnesota. God bless you both.
Those who are sounding the shofar will stand, and we ask everyone to rise. As Yom HaShoah, there is a powerful blast of a siren throughout the land of Israel, which will be recreated at this moment. You may be seated.
today, this evening, was Larry Tillemans' first time ever in his entire life in a synagogue. You know, that is amazing to me, but this was so much the right place for him to be. I mean, he has done so much in the last years after having made this enormously important contribution at Nuremberg itself, but in the last years to talk about it, to educate audiences about the Holocaust and other Nazi crimes. He has enormous credibility in doing that, and you could sense the gratitude and the love from the hundreds of people who were applauding wildly this evening when he and Jerry both were introduced. Holocaust Remembrance Program is not one where people ordinarily applaud.
We are the messengers of stories for the generations to come. We will always remember, we will never forget.
It's quite clear that Larry Tillemans is still deeply shocked by what he learned at Nuremberg. Nothing could have prepared him or just about any other American for what they encountered there, and because he was typing all these transcripts, he was probably getting a much heavier dose of horror than most of the people who worked at Nuremberg. We in law enforcement, we're not going to get to people's hearts. We're trying to get to their brains, to their fears. Don't do it, or bad things will happen to you. Larry Tillemans does it the other way. He's teaching morality. You can give 100 speeches and then say, okay, well, what have where's the result? Where's the tolerance that I engendered? Where's the hatred that I stopped? Where's the violence that didn't happen? And you'll never be able to show that, most likely. But someone like Larry Tillemans feels it in his heart, and he knows he's doing the right thing. If he were here in this room, I think he would say he knows he's doing the Lord's work.
Very impressive, very nice, sir.
Larry, thank you for being here. It's very hard to keep up with Larry Tillemans. I love this man.
Won't give up, never.
And there aren't very many of us left. I'm the last living American soldier, typist, that Third Army had anyway. And what happens when I go, and who's going to carry that story on?
It demeans all of us when people are treated inhumanely throughout the world.
Regrettably, genocide continues. We may say never again, but the truth of the matter is, since the Holocaust, it's been again and again and again and again, including right now, going on even as we speak.
People hating one another.
You just find yourself on the wrong side of the divide, and look what can happen. And that's why we all have to be concerned, because at one time or another, we can all find ourselves on the wrong side of the divide.
Used to be a saying, why can't we all get along? Let's get along. And I've been trying for some centuries, I guess, to get along. It has. There's one thing I want to teach to anybody is that you can't harbor hate. You've got to forgive. And I have. I've forgiven them in my heart anyway. I feel that I have, but I'm not going to discount the fact they did it. I was asked, well, what is the Holocaust? My time is over, but There's days I don't think I'm going to be here tomorrow. And you just better be ready. It's good I've gotten time to get ready. Yeah.
Funding for this program is provided in part by the Minnesota Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund and the citizens of Minnesota.